Captain America is calling for you to do something about the evils of US imperialism. Captain America, in the latest chapters, calls for an armed resistance against not only US interests in foreign regions, but also any force that subjugates the will and freedom of a people. Captain America takes an explicit step away from nonviolent peaceful protests and an abandonment of following US orders in favor of fighting side by side with the citizenry of the local population so that they might rule themselves in the future. A political stance that provides direct commentary on the US's invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. When the US invaded Afghanistan and Iraq, it's important to note the circumstances those military invasions stemmed from. When the Soviet Union collapsed and its influence in Afghanistan waned, the United States disliked the extremist political group that was quickly rising to power in its stead. The Taliban is an Islamic fundamentalist group that organized around promising to restore order after the chaos of the Soviet collapse, disarm unruly warlords that remained in power and were acting violently and belligerently, and culturally enforce a strict interpretation of conservative Islamic law. Before the Taliban took power and Afghanistan was still under Soviet control, there was an armed terrorist group called the Mujahideen that the United States funded and provided weapons to because they were anti-Soviet Union. I'll repeat that. The United States funded an armed terrorist group called the Mujahideen, which, spoiler alert, eventually became Al-Qaeda, because they were anti-communists and it benefited the United States to sow instability within the Soviet Union's grip. Anyways, so when the Soviets collapsed, the Taliban tried to seize power and fight against the warlords that remained entrenched in the region with the goal of securing stability for Afghanistan. But what could be more destabilizing than a foreign armed terror cell group like the Mujahideen, which prompted a civil war for control of Afghanistan between the Taliban and the Mujahideen? The Taliban were a younger group that gained their popularity for their promise of stability in the region, whereas the Mujahideen were popular for their militant anti-Soviet stance. This clash of priorities was inevitable and amplified by the foreign support the Mujahideen was receiving from the United States. After the removal of the Soviets from Afghanistan, the Mujahideen had a schism within their ranks. Their principal motivator behind their group to begin with was removing foreign military involvement in their country, period. And now that the Soviets were gone, the only country still fucking with them was the United States, the country that was supplying their terrorist cell. So the Mujahideen fractured, and an older, more radical group became known as Al-Qaeda and began to fight the Taliban for control, but more importantly, fight against the US military intervention, eventually culminating in 9/11. This is a complicated history that teaches us the intelligence lesson of blowback. The guns the US sent to the region, the violence we sowed, were eventually turned back at us. But this only amplified the violence that the United States was willing to deliver. The United States invaded Afghanistan and fought both Al-Qaeda as well as the Taliban because the Taliban was not willing to capture and turn over Al-Qaeda leaders when their priority was to build up and repair the country after the Soviet collapse and following civil war. Why would they make any effort for the foreign nation that had spent decades paying to cause violence in their home? Death and chaos ensued, like it's shown in Captain America. The US eventually moved on into invading Iraq, as David Colton, the Captain America who was active before Steve Rogers came out of the ice, put it, once you're on a roll, you don't stop. Realistically, since the US was already right next to Iraq, and the United States did not like that Saddam Hussein's government was socialist, we made up the excuse of the threat of weapons of mass destruction, like in the latest chapter of Captain America, in order to invade and fuck shit up. This amplified the already present militant terror group's presence, specifically ISIS, in the region, which automatically reprioritized to become nationalist anti-US militant groups, which is high-key valid, which only worsened the violence and length of time the US spent in the region. Back to Captain America and why this history is so important to the story Chip Zdarsky is writing. In Captain America, Steve Rogers is participating in a similar coup and subsequent invasion of Latveria, Dr. Doom's country. Since Zdarsky included Iraq and Afghanistan in the earlier chapters as backstory and to set the tone, with this history in mind, and because this is a comic book, when it's time for our in-story allegory, it's best to use an imaginary country. Latveria is meant to symbolize Iraq and to reflect Steve Rogers' position in this circumstance. Captain America is initially sent to Latveria in order to extract US allies, but accidentally takes part in a coup attack that renders Dr. Doom weak and forces him to go into hiding. Kind of, sort of, not really comparable to Iraq and Afghanistan's leadership being toppled before the US invasion. Even if that allegory isn't sound, it's a comparable situation Cap finds himself in. The important part comes next. This is all just circumstances until now. Captain America comes back with a shield squad with instructions to find hidden weapons of mass destruction. Sound familiar? With the intent of removing them and then leaving the country. While there, Captain America utilizes his most important superpower, listening to the locals and treating them like human beings. He learns that there are a few political factions at play in Latveria now that Dr. Doom is out of power. There are Doom loyalists. There is an armed paramilitary group led by a man named Salvation, who seems to be Doom light in more ways than one, wannabe authoritarian and donning a mask and costume like his predecessor. And lastly, there is a woman named Alina, who is the figurehead for the nonviolent peaceful protest movement against violence and pro-civilian freedom. After Cap learns that Salvation is in fact Doom light and committing atrocities against civilians, he issues a call to action. Captain America first approaches his SHIELD team, giving them the opportunity to do what is right, which he relates is to abandon U.S. interests in the region, WMDs, and fight alongside the civilian population against the would-be Salvation forces. Cap then approaches Alina, the queen of nonviolent peaceful protest, and relates to her that he will be on the front lines side by side with the people of Latveria, but he cannot be their voice. She must echo his call to action and urge her followers to fight and employ an armed resistance movement against Salvation. Tell them that freedom needs fighters. I speak of peace, of using words to bring about change. I believe in my heart that violence is a slippery slope. An empty chamber and a gun that's been fired simply begs for another bullet. But we are dying. Our friends and family are dying. This is a fight, and we need fighters. Join us. Pick up your weapons, lift your fists high, and give Latveria a future. The very next scene is Captain America side by side with protesters armed with makeshift riot shields and bats, with the intent to fight and even kill any Salvation militant forces that cross their path in the public streets. This was such an incredibly powerful chapter for two important IRL reasons, along with the political speculation for Chapter 10. First is the reflection of what should have been done involving Iraq and Afghanistan, and next, the second is what Captain America is calling on us to do for our country. First is what should have been done for Iraq and Afghanistan. Nothing! The United States should not have intervened against either Afghanistan or Iraq, let alone invade both. Any excuse that the United States provides about our concern for the civilian population is exposed as a bald-faced lie when met with both our history in funding the Mujahideen terrorists for years prior, as well as what our help looks like when we come rolling in, guns blazing, slaughtering men, women, and children, and even turning around and selling drugs in the region. We find the excuse around benefiting the civilian population against tyrannical rule in instances like the Iranian protests a few months before the beginning of the recent US-Iran war over the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian protesters were protesting authoritarian crackdowns that had resulted in civilian deaths and had responded in kind with the murder of, 10 Iranian police officers, which resulted in an even harsher crackdown. While we have found out since then that Israel's Mossad was definitely involved with some of these protests, which does not mean the protests are wrong or invalid, it just shows how many political actors are involved and what their intents are, in this case amplifying instability within Iran's domestic politics. At the time, the United States and Trump specifically had a very clear stance witnessing these protests. Help is on the way. We are locked and loaded. Keep protesting. Take over your institutions. Let us bomb them, was for a time the U.S. stance against the domestic pressure building in Iran. All of this internal pressure was put on pause and replaced by steadfast nationalism after the U.S. began its war with Iran, despite not following up with their dumbass encouragement of bombing civilians to save them. As a matter of fact, the U.S.'s first day of the war immediately bombed a girls' school, 160 little elementary school girls. That's our target. People only have the chance to use democracy when there is not a foreign country threatening to end an entire civilization on any given basis. This is called the rally around the flag effect that was present as well during our invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. If we really wanted to help, we would have extended a hand in democracy and mutual aid, soft power stuff, rather than advocating for terrorism before actually committing war crimes. We know the US's position on US foreign policy, but what is Captain America calling on us to do? Captain America is calling on us to join the front lines of protesters on the side of the civilians, to listen to the will of the populace and to back them up in the face of oppression. This message is not solely for the United States' foreign policy. We live in an America where concentration camps are heavily reported on, and there are only 3 responses people have to them. They are Nazi-style concentration camps and we should do something. Yeah, they are bad, but I don't know much about it. Plus, I'm busy trying to pay my bills day to day. And honestly, I don't give a fuck. If you find yourself not represented in those options, I suggest you do some research into the ICE facilities and do some self-reflection, because any semantics arguments that nerds try to make around the subject ultimately always boil down to, well, I don't really give a fuck. Anyways, I want to showcase an image that came out of a recent No King's Day anti-ICE protest in Portland that I think is a testament to where the American political zeitgeist is at. In Portland, protesters were standing in front of what became an open ICE concentration center. They broke the gate and awkwardly chose to walk away. Separately, they came back after No Kings and threw dildos around. We will not be arguing with dummies online who can't check ICE's own website and verify that 70% of all immigrants who have been locked up are legal immigrants who were allowed to be here and hadn't committed any crimes. It is what it is. But America is at a stage where the broad majority of people recognize the atrocities being committed before our eyes, and yet we sit idly by, unable to cross that line. And the only action our opposition party, Democrats, take is to condemn those further to their left, as the current media cycle shows. What would Captain America do? What did Captain America say? He told Anina, the figurehead for peaceful nonviolent protesters, to cross that line, that she needed to call up her followers and tell them that freedom needs fighters. Speculation. In Captain America number 10, that drops literally tomorrow, I'm so excited, I'm hyped. Red Hulk is pulling up, and he represents explicitly the military directly. Shout out Lieutenant Thaddeus Ross. And we might have to fight tooth and nail against our own country to prevent U.S. military interventionism in Latveria. I wonder what Cap would be willing to fight against in his own home country. Thank you all for watching. I love comic books. We're kind of in a comic book renaissance right now. Shit is goated. Hope y'all enjoyed. Stay woke. Stay safe. Peace.
Oh yeah, he's not gonna follow me anymore.
He's doing it again.
Oh no!
Oh! That was literally the lightning on dodge. That's exactly what it was.